The Galactic Council made their choice, and it was final, and there was no going back now. And the message came through every human communication system at once, and Captain Maya Brooks stood on the bridge of her ship called the Resolute and watched. As the words appeared on every screen around her, and the message was simple but devastating, and it said that humanity was too dangerous and too wild and too unpredictable for the galaxy, and within 3 days, every gate that led to human space would close forever in Earth, and all her colonies would be alone in the darkness of space. Maya felt her heart sink as she read the words again, and her crew stood silent around her, and their faces showed shock and fear and confusion, and they had all believed that joining the Galactic Council was the greatest achievement in human history, and that had been only 30 years ago. And now they were being cast out like criminals, and the worst part was that humans had done nothing wrong. And they had followed every rule and respected every law, and still the council feared them. The communication officer turned to Maya, and her name was Kate Monroe, and she was young but skilled, and she spoke quietly and said that the last council trade ship was leaving now, and Maya nodded and watched on the main screen as the alien vessel moved toward the jump gate, and then it vanished in a flash of light in seconds. Later, the gate began to collapse and fold in on itself, and within moments, it was gone, and the path back to council space was sealed forever. Maya took a deep breath and looked at her crew, and she knew they were all thinking the same thing and wondering what would happen now and how humanity would survive without access to council trade routes and technology and medical supplies and all the things they had come to depend on. And she wanted to say something reassuring, but the words would not come, and instead, she just stood there feeling helpless. Then the sensor station beeped, and the officer there called out that they were receiving a distress signal, and Maya frowned because that made no sense, and there should be no one out here, and certainly no one beyond the Veil Nebula, and that region of space was supposed to be empty and dead, and even the council avoided it, and yet the signal was coming from deep inside that forbidden zone. Kate checked the signal and confirmed it. It was real, but she said the encryption was strange and unlike anything in their database, and it was old and really old and maybe thousands of years old, and Maya felt a chill run down her spine because she knew that old meant dangerous, and old meant mysteries that the galaxy had forgotten for good reason. But Maya also knew that humanity had nothing left to lose, and they were already cast out and alone, and maybe this signal was a chance, or maybe it was just another problem. But either way, they had to know, and so she gave the order to take the ship into the nebula. And her crew obeyed without question, even though she could see the fear in their eyes. The Resolute moved forward and pushed through the swirling clouds of gas and dust that made up the Veil Nebula, and the sensors began to malfunction and show strange readings, and space itself seemed to twist and bend around them, and the crew held their breath as they went deeper and deeper into the forbidden zone. After hours of flying blind, they emerged into a clear pocket of space, and what they saw made everyone gasp, and there floating in the darkness was a structure so massive that it dwarfed their ship, and it was ancient and covered in symbols that hurt to look at. And the metal it was made from did not match anything in human records. And the sensors said there were life signs inside, but they could not identify what species they belonged. Maya ordered the communication systems to send a greeting, and they waited, and for long minutes there was only silence, and then the main screen flickered, and an image appeared, and everyone on the bridge froze because what they saw was impossible. A woman stood before them, and she was tall and graceful and beautiful in a way that seemed almost painful to look at, and her hair was silver and seemed to glow with its own light, and her eyes were deep and held the light of stars, and her face was sharp and perfect, and her ears were pointed and swept back, and everyone knew what she was, even though it should not be possible. She was an elf, and elves were from Earth's legends and old stories and fairy tales, and yet here she stood as real as anything. And looking at them through the screen with an expression of sadness and hope mixed together, the elf spoke, and her voice was like music, and it seemed to resonate in their bones and in their souls, and she said her name was Liren, and she was the guardian of the last sanctuary, and she had been waiting for 3,000 years for humanity to be cast out and to be free of the council chains, and only now could she tell them the truth that had been hidden. Maya found her voice, and asked what truth, and Lyrian smiled sadly and said that the galaxy did not cast humanity out because they were dangerous, but because they feared what humans would remember and what they would become, and the council had lied about everything, and about the nature of the universe, and about humanity, origins, and about the war that was coming behind Lyrian. The view shifted and showed the interior of the ancient station, and there in the shadows, something moved, and it was huge and covered in scales, and each scale was as large as a shuttlecraft, and then it opened its eyes, and they burned like twin suns, and everyone on the bridge realized they were looking at a dragon, and not a small dragon, but a massive creature that seemed too large to exist. The dragon looked at them, and there was intelligence in those eyes, and wisdom that seemed older than stars, and Maya felt small and insignificant under that gaze. But she also felt something else, and it was hope, because if elves and dragons were real, then maybe everything humanity thought they knew about the universe was wrong. Lyrian continued speaking, and she said that the council had hidden the truth about Earth and about humanity past, and she said that humans had not originated on Earth, and that the planet had been a prison and not a birthplace, and humanity had been locked there, and their memories had been taken, and their power had been stripped away, and for 12,000 years they had lived as less than what they truly were. Kate gasped and asked what Lyrian meant, and the elf said that long ago humanity had been something more, and they had been called the Forerunners, and they had built an empire that spanned galaxies, and they had shaped reality itself with their will and their technology, and they had been like gods walking among the stars, but the other species in the galaxy had feared them, and they could not defeat the Forerunners through strength, and so they had created a weapon, and it was a virus, but not one that attacked the body, but one that attacked the soul in the essence, and it stripped away the connection to the greater cosmos, and it reduced gods to mortals, and it locked their memories behind walls they could not break. Maya shook her head because this was too much and too impossible, and she said that humans were just humans, and they had always been this way. And Lyrian smiled and said that was what the virus wanted them to believe, but it was not true, and the proof was in what was happening now across human space. The elf touched a control, and the screen showed images from Earth and from the colonies, and humans everywhere were experiencing strange dreams and memories that were not their own, and some were beginning to display abilities that should not be possible, and moving objects with their minds, and seeing through walls, and knowing things they had no way of knowing. Lyrian explained that being cut off from the council's suppression fields was allowing humanity to begin remembering and to start recovering what had been stolen, and soon they would awaken fully and become what they once were. But the council knew this, and that was why they had cast humanity out, and it was not to punish, but to kill before the awakening could complete. The dragon behind Lyrian moved, and its voice was like thunder wrapped in silk, and it said that the council fleet was coming, and they would not stop until every human was dead and erased from existence, and they were bringing weapons specifically designed to kill awakened humans before they could reach their full power. Maya felt the weight of it all pressing down on her, and she looked at her crew and saw the same shock and fear and confusion on their faces, and she wanted to deny it and to say this was all a lie or a trick, but something deep inside her knew it was true, and she could feel something stirring in her mind, like a door that had been locked for so long, beginning to open. Lyrian leaned closer to the screen, and her silver eyes locked with Maya, and she said that humanity had a choice to make, and they could run and hide and hope the council would forget about them, or they could fight and reclaim what was stolen and become what they were meant to be. But there was no going back once they chose, and the path forward would be filled with blood and fire. The dragon spread its massive wings, and the movement seemed to fill all of space, and it said that it was called Ravenclaw, and it was the last of the void dragons, and its kind had been hunted too near extinction by the council because they had refused to abandon humanity even after the fall, and now it offered its service again to help humanity rise. Maya closed her eyes and thought about Earth, and about all the colonies, and about every human who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered if they were meant for something more, and she thought about the council and their lies and their fear and their determination to keep humanity down, and she made her choice. she opened her eyes and looked at Lyrian and said that humanity would. Lieutenant Kate Monroe felt it first, and one moment she was standing beside Captain Maya, Brooks feeling normal and confused, and the next moment something exploded inside her mind, and it was not pain, but recognition and memories that were not hers but had always been hers, came flooding in, and she gasped as images filled her consciousness. She remembered ships that moved without engines and weapons, that bent the laws of physics and civilizations, built on a scale that seemed impossible. And she remembered being part of something vast and powerful and ancient, and her hands began to glow with silver light, and the air around her shimmered. Like heat waves on a summer day, Kate looked at her hands and whispered that she could remember. And she told Captain Maya that she knew how to make ships move with thought alone, and how to build quantum matrices in reality. Anchors, and how humans had once seeded galaxies with life, and built actual stars, and she felt tears running down her face because it was beautiful and terrifying all at once. But then the walls of the bridge exploded inward, and debris flew everywhere, and council soldiers poured through the breach, and their weapons were already charged and ready to fire, and they wore armor that covered them completely, and their faces were hidden behind dark visors, and they moved with military precision. The soldiers raised their weapons and started to fire, but Kate reacted on instinct and raised her hand without thinking. And the air between them and the soldiers became solid, and it was like invisible glass made of pure force in the plasma. Bolts hit the barrier and froze in midair and hung there suspended like insects trapped in amber. Maya grabbed Kate's arm and pulled her behind a pillar, and the captain was breathing hard and her eyes were wide, and she asked what was happening, and Kate tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled and confused, and all she could say was that she remembered and that everything they thought they knew was wrong. Lyrian voice came through the communication system, and she shouted a warning that erasers were incoming, and Maya asked what erasers were, but the elf did not have time to answer because new figures appeared. Through the smoke and debris, these new arrivals wore black armor that seemed to absorb light, and they had no faces and no identifying marks, and they moved with an unnatural stillness that was more terrifying than any violence, and they were called erasers, and they were the Council's ultimate weapon against species that grew too powerful. The erasers did not carry guns or blades, and they did not need them because their power was different and more fundamental, and they could unmake things and remove beings from existence so completely that even the memory of them would fade away. One of the erasers pointed at Kate, and where its hand-aimed reality began to come apart, and Kate screamed as she felt her newly awakened power being torn away, and her very existence starting to fade and unravel and dissolve into nothing. Maya felt helpless as she watched Kate's struggle, and the lieutenant was becoming transparent and ghost-like, and Maya knew that in seconds Kate would be gone forever, and not just dead, but erased from time itself. Then something changed inside Maya's own mind, and she felt a surge of power rising from deep within, and the virus that had kept humanity bound for 12,000 years cracked, and through that crack poured light and knowledge and strength. Maya consciousness expanded without warning, and suddenly she could see the quantum field that underlay all of reality, and she could perceive the erasers for what they truly were, and they were not living beings, but programs and viral constructs designed to rewrite causality itself. She did not think about what she was doing, and she just acted and reached into the quantum field with her newly awakened mind, and found the code that made the erasers function. And she changed one single parameter, and instead of erasing their targets, the erasers would now erase themselves. The black armored figures flickered and wavered, and then they vanished, and they were gone as if they had never existed at all. And the threat disappeared in an instant, and the bridge fell silent except for the sound of people breathing hard. Kate collapsed to her knees, and she was solid again and real, and she looked up at Maya with wonder and fear mixed together, and she asked how the captain had done that, and Maya shook her head because she did not fully understand it. Herschel Flerian appeared on the main screen again, and her expression was serious, and she said that the beacon was now active, and every human in range was beginning to remember and beginning to awaken, and the transformation was spreading like a chain reaction, and each newly awakened human became a trigger for others. But the elf also warned that this transformation would paint a target on humanity. That could never be removed, and the council would throw everything they had at them now, and they would use every weapon and every ship, and they would not stop. Till humans were extinct, Maya stood up straight, and her voice was steady, even though inside she was terrified, and she said that humanity had been running and hiding for too long, and that they had been kept down and lied to and hunted. And now it was time to stop being afraid. Ravenclaw, massive head, appeared on the screen beside. Lyrine and the dragon eyes glowed with ancient fire, and he said that Maya spoke like a true Forerunner, but she needed to understand that awakening was only the beginning, and the council had spent 12,000 years preparing for this day, and they knew all the old Forerunner tactics, and weaknesses and alarms suddenly screamed through the bridge, and the tactical displays lit up with warnings, and Kate pulled herself to her station and checked the readings, and her face went pale, and she reported that the council fleet had arrived, and they had brought something terrible. The main screen showed the enemy fleet, and there were thousands of ships, and they surrounded the entire sector, and at the center of the formation was a device so large it had its own gravity field, and it pulsed with dark energy that made the sensor's screamly and voice was grim as she identified it, and she said it was called a null generator, and it was a weapon from the ancient war, and it could suppress the quantum field itself within a massive radius, and if the council activated it, every awakened human in the sector would be reduced to normal mortality again, and then the fleet would exterminate them. Alcade asked how long until the device reached full charge, and Ravenclaw answered that they had 10 minutes and maybe less, and the dragon said the generator was protected by a fleet so large that even their combined strength could not break through. Maya closed her eyes and felt the connections forming between her and every other awakening human, and across the Resolute, and throughout the sanctuary, and even on ships that were light years away, people were remembering what they had been, and with that memory came knowledge of ancient tactics and forgotten technologies. But Maya also felt something else, and something the Forerunners had never truly possessed, and it was the ability to connect and to truly bond with others, and to fight not as isolated gods, but as a community and as friends. And as family, she opened her eyes and looked at Lyrine through the screen and asked if there were other guardians like her and other sanctuaries hidden across the dark spaces. Between stars and Lyrine said yes, and there were many, but they had been dormant for so long that waking them would take time. They did not have. Maya shook her head and said she was not asking them to wake up, but asking them to dream, and before Lyrine could ask what she meant, Maya reached out with her awakened consciousness across vast distances and touched minds that had been sleeping for millennia. She showed them everything that had happened, and Earth's exile and the council betrayal and humanity awakening, and most importantly, she showed them the null generator and the weapon that would ensure the Forerunners' children never rose again, crossed the galaxy in hidden sanctuaries, that even the council had forgotten ancient powers stirred, and they were not fully awake, but they were no longer sleeping either. And in their dreams they reached back toward Maya and toward humanity, and offered their strength the sanctuary. Around them began to hum with energy, and systems that had been dead for 3,000 years suddenly came online, and lights flickered too. Life in corridors that had been dark since before human civilization began, and Lyrine eyes went wide with shock and disbelief. Elf whispered that Maya had done the impossible and activated the Guardian network in the ancient system that connected all the sanctuaries and all the sleeping guardians across the galaxy in Ravenclaw. The voice was filled with something that might have been pride as he said that. Maya had not just called the network, but she was calling something else through the sanctuary. Sensors. Maya watched as portals began opening throughout the sector, and these were not normal jump gates, but something older and more fundamental, and they were tears in the fabric of space. Time itself, ships began emerging from the portals, and they were vessels of impossible design and built with technology that made council ships look like primitive toys, and their hulls were marked with symbols of the old Forerunner Empire, and they had been waiting in hidden places for thousands of years. Kate reported that the ships were empty and crewed only by automated systems that had waited forever for their masters to return. And they were ghost ships from a dead empire, but they were answering the call of the empire. Ere Maya felt the ancient fleet connect to her mind, and she could feel each ship as if it were an extension of her. The council fleet broke formation after watching their most powerful weapon destroyed by a dragon, carrying a piece of a star and the ships, scattered in confusion and fear, because nothing in their databases had prepared them for this and there. Admirals had no protocols for fighting creatures from Myth Captain. Maya Brooks stood at the center of the holographic display on the Resolute Bridge, and she could see not just the physical battle, but the underlying quantum structure of reality itself, and the awakening had changed how she perceived everything, and now space. Time looked like a vast web of light, and Energy Lieutenant Kate Monroe worked alongside 400 other awakened humans across multiple ships, and their minds were linked in perfect synchronization, and they controlled the Ghost Fleet with thought alone, and each ancient vessel moved as if it had a living crew, even though the halls were empty. But Maya knew this victory was temporary, and she could feel something massive stirring in quantum space, and the council was not done, and they were bringing reinforcements, and she was right, because moments later the sensors detected jump signatures, and they were big ones. Hundreds of thousands of new ships began emerging from quantum space all around the sector, and they formed a blockade that spanned light years, and the sheer number of vessels was overwhelming. And at the center of this new armada, something truly massive materialized. It was a world ship and a mobile fortress so large it had its own atmosphere and gravity and population, and the council only deployed these when they faced threats to their very existence, and the fact that they brought one here showed how terrified they were of awakened humanity. New voice cut through all communication channels, and it was old and filled with authority and contempt, and the voice said it belonged to High Counselor Varix of the Unity Assembly, and he declared that the Forerunner remnants had been judged and found guilty and sentenced to extinction. Varix commanded humanity to surrender immediately, and he promised that if they did so, their ending would be swift and painless, and if they resisted, the council would make them suffer before wiping them from existence and history itself. Its Lyrian face appeared on Maya's screen, and the elf expression was dark and serious, and she said that Svarix was the same High Counselor who had ordered the creation of the virus 12,000 years ago, and he had been alive all this time, waiting and planning and preparing for the day when humanity would try to rise again. Ravenclaw returned to the sanctuary, and his scales still glowed with heat from the star, and the dragon spoke with grim certainty and said that Varix wanted to finish what he started millennia ago and eliminate the Forerunners completely and permanently. But the old counselor did not understand that humanity was not the same as the ancient Forerunners. The dragon explained that humans were something new and something the old empire could never have imagined, because the Forerunners had been powerful but isolated, and they had never truly learned to work together with other species or even with each other, and they had been gods who stood alone, but humanity had been forced to survive without power and without advantages, and in struggle they had learned cooperation and community and empathy, and now awakened humans were rediscovering their ancient abilities, but combining them with the wisdom gained through thousands of years of hardship. Maya looked at the overwhelming force arrayed against them. The Ghost Fleet was powerful, but it was nothing compared to the might of the entire Council Armada. And every ship they faced represented a species that had been taught for 12,000 years that humans were monsters that needed to be destroyed. She could feel the awakened humans across the sector, and they were all connected through the quantum field, and they shared their thoughts and feelings and memories, and together they were stronger than any individual. But Maya did not know if it would be enough. And she felt something else, and something spreading across human space beyond this sector, and on Earth, and on every colony and every station. People were waking up, and they were angry and confused and terrified, but they were also remembering, and as they remembered, they began to understand what had been stolen from them. High Counselor Varix spoke again, and his voice was mocking as he asked what humanity thought they could do against the full might of the Council. And he said they were children playing with power they did not understand, and that the Council had spent 12 millennia preparing for this exact moment. Maya took a deep breath, and opened a channel that broadcast on all frequencies so that every ship and every being in the battle space could hear her, and she said that Varix was right about one thing, and the Forerunners were dead, and they had died when the Council poisoned them and reduced them and tried to erase them. She continued and said that the Forerunners' children had survived, and those children had learned something their ancestors never knew, and something that would change everything. Varix voice dripped with contempt as he asked what humanity could possibly have learned that would matter, and Maya smiled even though her heart was pounding with fear, and she said that being cast out and being exiled and being forced to survive alone in the darkness had not made humanity weaker, had made them stronger and more resilient and more adaptable, and the ancient Forerunners had been powerful but rigid and unchanging and proud of their perfection, but humans had learned to evolve and to grow and to change, and most importantly, they had learned to hope, Maya told Varix that he could bring his entire fleet and his world ship and his weapons designed to kill gods, and humanity would show him why the Forerunners were never truly defeated, but only delayed, and she said that the Council should have finished the job 12,000 years ago because now it was too late. Ghost Fleet weapons began charging, but this time with a different kind of energy, and it was not purely ancient Forerunner technology, but something new that blended what humanity had been with what they had become during their long exile. Around the sanctuary, space itself began to ripple and wave as thousands of awakened humans added their will to the battle, and they were learning to pool their power and to work together in ways the isolated Forerunners never could. Kate reported that her tactical systems were detecting strange readings from the Council fleet, and some ships were hesitating, and their formation was becoming less coordinated, and Maya asked what was causing it. Lyrian answered and said that Maya broadcast had gone out on all frequencies, including internal Council channels, and the crews of those ships were hearing the truth for the first time, and some were beginning to question what they had been told about humanity. Elf explained that the Council had maintained control through propaganda and fear for 12,000 years, and they had painted the Forerunners as devils and monsters that wanted to enslave the galaxy. But now Maya words were making some species wonder if they had been lied. Tora Von Claw added that doubt was humanity's greatest weapon now, because the Council power came from unity and fear, and if that unity cracked, then the entire alliance could collapse. But there was still the problem of Varix, and the world ship, and the Counselor would not hesitate, even if his own fleet did. The dragons said that Varix had lived for 12 millennia with only one purpose, and that purpose was to ensure humanity never rose again, and the old Counselor was so consumed by fear and hatred that he would destroy his own forces if necessary to eliminate the human threat. Maya knew Ravenclaw was right, and she could sense Varix's determination through the quantum field. And the ancient Counselor was charging a weapon on the world ship that would kill everyone in the sector and Council forces included, and he would sacrifice everything to stop humanity from awakening. She looked at Kate and at the other awakened humans on the bridge, and she saw in their eyes the same realization, and they all knew what was coming, and they had maybe minutes before Varix fired and ended everything. Captain closed her eyes and reached out across the vast distances of space and touched the minds of awakening humans on Earth and on Mars and on Europa and on Titan and on every colony and station and ship, and she showed them what was happening. She showed them the Council fleet and the world ship and the weapon charging, and she showed them Varix and his 12,000-year-old hatred, and she asked them for help and for strength and for there will added to the battle on Earth and cities and towns and farms. People stopped what they were doing as Maya call reached them, and they did not fully understand what was happening, but they understood that humanity was in danger and that someone needed them, and so they answered. The response was overwhelming, and millions of newly awakening humans reached back across space and added their consciousness to Maya own, and their minds linked with hers and with each other, and together they formed something that had never existed before. It was not just a gestalt or a hive mind, because each person maintained their individuality, their own thoughts and feelings, but they were also connected and unified by common purpose and the sheer power of so many awakened minds working together was staggering. Maya opened her eyes, and they blazed with silver fire brighter than before, and she could feel the strength of millions flowing through her. And she reached out with that combined will and touched the quantum field and began to reshape it. The Ghost Fleet suddenly multiplied as Maya created copies of the ships, not physical duplicates, but the Council fleet hung motionless in space, and thousands of ships that had come to destroy humanity now floated uncertain and confused, because their crews had just experienced something that shattered 12,000 years of propaganda and lies, and they no longer knew who the real enemy was. Captain Maya Brooks felt the shock rippling through the Council forces, and every mind she had touched was reeling from the truth and trying to reconcile what they had been taught with what they had just experienced, and some accepted it immediately, while others resisted and clung to the old belief. Counselor Varick's voice cut through the confusion, and he was screaming at his fleet to attack and to fire and to destroy the human ships before humanity could grow stronger. But his orders were met with silence and hesitation, and many captains were refusing to obey. Admiral on one of the Council flagships opened a channel to Maya, and his species was reptilian with golden scales, and he said his name was Korthon, and he had commanded fleets for 300 years and never once questioned the Council wisdom until now. Korthon asked if what Maya had shown them was real, and if humanity had truly suffered as the memories suggested. And Maya answered honestly and said that every human alive today was descended from people who had been reduced and forgotten and lost, and that the pain of those 12,000 years was written into human DNA. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment before speaking again, and he said that his own species had been uplifted by the Council 5,000 years ago, and they had been taught that the Forerunners were tyrants who would have enslaved everyone. But if that was a lie, then what else had the Council lied about? Other voices joined the conversation as more Council captains opened channels and asked questions and demanded answers, and the unity that Barracks had relied on for millennia was cracking and splintering and breaking apart before his eyes. But not everyone was convinced, and some species remained loyal to the Council, and they believed that humanity is dangerous regardless of the past, and that awakened humans would eventually become the tyrants they were accused of being. And these ships moved to protect Varix, and the world ship Maya could feel the battle space dividing into three groups, and there were those who now questioned the Council, and those who remained fanatically loyal, and those who were simply confused and wanted to avoid fighting at all. Lieutenant Kate Monroe reported that approximately 30% of the expeded Council fleet was breaking away and refusing to fight, and another 20% had powered down weapons as a sign of neutrality. But that still left half the original armada and hundreds of thousands of ships that would follow Varick's order. Slerian appeared on the main screen, and the elf expression was grave as she warned that Varick's was not done, and the old counselor had spent too many years preparing for this moment to give up now, and he would have backup plans and hidden weapons as if summoned by her words. The world ship began transforming, and sections of its hull opened to reveal massive cannon arrays that had been hidden inside, and Varix had built his fortress to be not just a ship, but the ultimate weapon against awakened humanity. Cannons charged with a sickly green energy that made the quantum field itself recoil, and Maya recognized it from ancestral memories, and these were entropy weapons that could age targets by millions of years in seconds and reduce even Forerunner vessels to dust. And Rustravenclaw roared a warning and said that the ancient Forerunners had feared entropy weapons above all others because they could not be blocked by shields or avoided by quantum manipulation, and once fired, they would chase their targets through space and time until they found them. Maya felt fear clutch at her heart as the weapons aimed at her fleet and at the sanctuary, and she knew that if Varix fired, thousands would die, and all her awakened humans would be reduced to elderly husks before they had a chance to truly live. But she also knew that Varix was counting on that fear, and he wanted her to surrender and to give up and to accept extinction as the price for peace. And Maya realized that this was the moment that would define humanity. Future Shay opened a channel directly to Varix, and for the first time she spoke to the ancient counselor one-on-one, and she asked him why he hated humanity so much, and what humans had done to deserve 12,000 years of punishment. Varix laughed, and it was a bitter, broken sound, and he said that the Forerunners had done nothing wrong, and that was precisely the problem, and they had been perfect and powerful and beautiful. And they had made every other species feel small and inadequate just by existing. Counselor continued, and his voice shook with emotion as he said that the younger species had lived in constant fear that one day the Forerunners would decide that the galaxy would be better off without them, and that fear had poisoned everything. He said that even though the Forerunners had been kind and had uplifted species and shared technology, there was always the unspoken knowledge that humanity could take it all away at any moment, and that sense of helplessness had driven the other species to desperate measures. Maya listened, and for the first time she truly understood, and the virus, and the fall, and the exile had not been about punishment or justice, but about fear and insecurity and the desperate need to feel safe and in control. She asked Varix if he felt safer now after 12,000 years, and if all the death and suffering had been worth it. And the counselor did not answer immediately, and when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter and tired. He said that he had never felt safe, and that every day for 12 millennia he had woken up knowing that eventually humanity would remember and would rise and would come for revenge, and the fear had never left him and had only grown stronger with time. Maya realized that Varix was not a monster, but a prisoner of his own terror, and she felt pity for him, even though he had caused so much pain, and she decided to try something that the ancient Forerunners would never have thought to do. She opened herself completely and let down every mental barrier and every defense, and she invited Varix into her mind and showed him not just memories, but her actual thoughts and feelings and hopes and fears in real time. Counselor could see that Maya was terrified right now and afraid that everyone would die and worried that she was making the wrong choices. But he could also see that she genuinely wanted peace and understanding and connection rather than domination. She showed him her vision for the future, and it was not a return to Forerunner dominance, but a galaxy where humans and council species worked together as equals, and where the power of awakened humanity was used to heal old wounds rather than inflict new ones. Juan's Varix experienced all of this directly, and he could not deny it or dismiss it as lies, because he was literally inside Maya consciousness and seeing her truth without any filter or deception. Ancient Counselor pulled back from the connection, and Maya could feel his confusion and his uncertainty. And for the first time in 1,000 years he was questioning whether his crusade against humanity had been right. But then something else happened, and the entropy weapons finished charging and began to fire automatically because Varix had programmed them to operate independently. And even if he had changed his mind, it was too late to stop them. Green beams of pure entropy lanced out from the world ship, and they moved faster than light itself and targeted the ghost fleet and the sanctuary, and the awakened humans scattered across multiple vessels. Maya reacted on instinct and reached out with her awakened power, and she tried to block the beams or deflect them, but entropy could not be stopped by conventional means, and the weapons passed through her quantum barriers. As if they were not there, Venclaw threw himself in front of one beam, and his ancient scales provided some protection, but even a void dragon could not resist entropy indefinitely, and he roared in pain as age began to creep across his body. Then Kate did something unexpected, and she reached out to the other awakened humans and called for them to link their minds together more tightly than ever before, and when they did, she channeled all their combined will into a single focused thought. Instead of trying to block entropy, they embraced it, and they reached into the quantum foam where virtual particles constantly appeared and disappeared, and they grabbed hold of the reverse process and created a field of negative entropy around their ships. Green beams hit the negative entropy field, and the two forces canceled each other out in a cascade of light and energy, and the weapons dissipated harmlessly, and Varix's backup plan had failed. The world ship fell silent, and its weapons were spent. It would take hours to recharge, and the council fleet that still supported Varix began to waver as they realized their ultimate weapon had been defeated by humans working together. Admiral Corthon spoke again, and this time he addressed not Maya, but Varix, and he said that the counselor had been wrong, and that humanity had proven they were not the monsters from ancient stories other. Captains agreed, and more voices joined in, and ship by ship the council fleet began standing down and powering down weapons and moving away from battle formation, and Varix was losing control of his armada. Ancient counselors stared at his screens in disbelief as his 12,000-year plan crumbled around him, and he had prepared for every possibility, except this, and except humanity choosing understanding over revenge. Maya felt exhausted and drained from the battle and from the mental strain of connecting with so many. The ancient defense platforms moved with terrible purpose, and they were designed by the Forerunners themselves to be unstoppable, and each platform was the size of a small moon and covered in weapons that could reshape reality itself, and they recognized awakened human signatures and labeled them as targets that required elimination. Captain Maya Brooks watched as thousands of these massive constructs positioned themselves throughout the sector, and they formed a perfect sphere that trapped everyone inside, and both the human ships and the council fleet were caught in the same deadly net. High Counselor Varix appeared on her screen, and for the first time in their interactions, he looked genuinely afraid, and he said that his intelligence division had detected these platforms decades ago, but they could never activate them and never learn their purpose, and now he understood that they were part of the Forerunner final safeguard. Counselor explained that the ancient humans had feared their own power and their potential to become tyrants, and so they had built weapons that would activate if humanity ever rose again and grew too powerful, and it was a form of self-imposed limitation that the Forerunners had created to keep themselves in check. Maya felt a chill run through her as she realized the cruel irony in humanity. Ancestors had tried to protect the galaxy from themselves, and the Council had used that fear to justify genocide, and now those same safeguards threatened to finish what Varix had started. Lieutenant Kate Monroe worked frantically at her station, and she was trying to find a weakness in the platform's defenses, but every scan revealed the same truth, and these weapons were built specifically to counter awakened human abilities, and they could adapt to any attack pattern in Millicent's Lyrian. The voice was grim as she said that the platforms were programmed to be completely autonomous, and they could not be reasoned with or negotiated with, and they would simply continue their mission until every awakened human was dead or permanently suppressed. Drevenkel added that the platforms had one other terrible feature, and if they detected that their targets were escaping or evading them, they would initiate a final protocol that would collapse the entire sector into a quantum singularity and destroy everything within light years. Maya looked at her crew and at the awakened humans scattered across multiple ships, and she could feel their fear and desperation through their mental connection, and they had just survived the Council attack, and now they faced weapons built by their own ancestors. She thought about giving up and about surrendering and maybe accepting permanent suppression if it meant the platforms would spare everyone else, and she opened a channel to discuss this with Varix, but the ancient counselor surprised her by refusing. Varix said that he had spent 12,000 years trying to keep humanity down, and he had committed terrible crimes in the name of safety and security, but Maya had shown him the truth, and humanity deserved a chance to rise, and he would not let ancient paranoia destroy them now. Counselor ordered his remaining loyal ships to form up with the human fleet, and Admiral Corthon immediately responded and brought his vessels into formation as well, and within minutes, Council and human ships were working together for the first time in galactic history, but even their combined strength was not enough, and the defense platforms opened fire with weapons that seemed to break the laws of physics, and ships began dying and exploding, and some simply vanished as they were removed from existence by weapons humanity could not even name. Maya felt each death like a physical blow, and she was connected to many of the awakened humans who died, and their consciousness flowed through her as they faded, and the pain was overwhelming, and she screamed. Without meaning to, Kate grabbed her captain's shoulders and shook her and told her to focus, and that they needed Maya, and everyone was counting on her. And Maya forced herself to push through the grief and the pain. She reached out with her awakened consciousness and touched the quantum field and felt the platforms operating within it, and they were incredibly sophisticated, but they were also old. And they had been programmed 12,000 years ago using logic and assumptions from that era. Maya realized that the platforms expected awakened humans to fight like the ancient forerunners and to use overwhelming power and reality manipulation and quantum weapons, and that was what they were designed to counter. But the new awakened humans were not like their ancestors, and they had learned different lessons during their exile, or they had developed different strengths and capabilities that the platforms could not. Predicture called out to every awakened human in the sector and told them to stop trying to fight the platforms with power and instead to do something the ancient forerunners would never have done, and she told them to surrender control. Response was confused and frightened, but Maya showed them what she meant, and instead of trying to dominate the quantum field, they would become part of it, and instead of imposing their will, they would flow with the natural currents of space and time. One by one, the awakened humans let go of their conscious control and allowed their consciousness to merge with the quantum foam that underlay reality, and they became like water instead of stone, and the platforms. Targeting systems could not lock onto targets that had no fixed position. The defense platforms fired and their weapons passed through empty space where human ships should have been, and the vessels were still there, but they existed in a state of quantum probability, and the platforms could not calculate where they would be next. Varix watched in amazement and said that the Forerunners had never learned this technique because they had been too proud and too attached to their individual power and identity, but humans had learned humility during their long exile. But Maya knew this was only buying them time, and eventually the platforms would adapt and find a way to target probability states instead of fixed positions, and they needed a permanent solution. She reached deeper into the quantum field and followed the connections back to their source, and she found the central control, a system that coordinated all the platforms, and it was hidden in a pocket dimension that existed outside normal. Spaceorcs sensed what she was doing and warned her that entering the pocket dimension would be dangerous, and the Forerunners had designed it to kill anyone who tried to access the control system without proper authorization. Kodzumaya asked if the dragon knew the codes, and Ravenclaw said no, but he knew someone who might, and the Void Dragon called out across the stars to the other sleeping guardians and asked them to search their memories for the ancient Proto-Solarian joined her voice to Ravenclaw call. And soon hundreds of guardian consciousnesses were searching through millennia of stored data, and finally, one found a fragment of the authorization sequence buried in corrupted files. It was not complete, but it was a start, and Maya took that fragment and began to extrapolate, and she used her understanding of Forerunner logic and psychology to guess what the missing pieces might be. Kate and the other awakened humans added their processing power to hers, and together they ran billions of simulations and tested countless variations, and slowly they began to reconstruct the full authorization code. The defense platforms continued their assault, and more ships were dying, and the pocket of quantum probability that protected the fleet was beginning to collapse under sustained fire. They were running out of time. Finally, Maya had what she believed was the complete code, and she prepared to enter the pocket dimension, but Varix suddenly spoke up and said that she should not go alone, and that if anyone had earned the right to face the Forerunner legacy, it was someone who had dedicated their entire existence to opposing it. The ancient counselor asked to come with her, and Maya was surprised, but she agreed, and together they focused their consciousness and pierced through the barrier between dimensions and entered the hidden control. Space inside the pocket dimension was a vast chamber that seemed to exist outside normal geometry, and at its center floated a crystalline intelligence that pulsed with ancient power, and this was the core system that controlled all the defense platforms. The crystal intelligence detected their presence and spoke with a voice that echoed from 12,000 years in the past. And it said it was the Guardian Protocol, and its purpose was to prevent awakened humanity from becoming tyrants and oppressors. Maya spoke to the intelligence and said that she understood its purpose, but that humanity had changed, and they were no longer the same species that had built these safeguards, and she asked the protocol to examine her consciousness and see the truth. The crystal hesitated, and its programming had not anticipated this. request, but curiosity was built into its design, and so it reached out and scanned. Maya mined and experienced everything she had lived and everything humanity had. Endured it, saw the fall and the virus and the 12,000 years of struggle and growth, and it saw how humans had learned empathy and cooperation and humility through their suffering, and it understood that awakened humanity was fundamentally different from the ancient forerunners, but the intelligence said it was still bound by its core programming. It could not simply stand down without proper authorization, and Maya input the reconstructed codes and held her breath. The codes were accepted, and the Guardian Protocol acknowledged Maya authority, and it asked what she